Every sip of alcohol is silently chipping away at the very foundation of your body, your bones. While we relish the relaxation and joy from our favorite beverages, beneath the surface, a war rages. Today, we pull back the curtain on the alarming relationship between the drink in your hand and the strength of your skeleton. Are you unknowingly compromising your bones' integrity? And trust me, by the end of the video, I'm going to talk to you about steps to take to reverse this damage, so please stick around to the very end of this video. So, adult humans have a total of just over 200 bones. Collectively, and including other tissues like cartilage and ligaments, these bones make up our skeleton. The skeleton is what supports and protects our body's other organs. It also allows us to move around and interact with our environment pretty rapidly. But the actual function of bones goes beyond just structural support. The vast majority of our blood cells are actually produced inside the bone marrow. This is the soft, sponge-like material in the center, as well as absorbing heavy metals such as lead and mercury from the blood. Now, an important aspect of normal bone functioning is so-called bone remodeling. This refers to a process whereby old bone is broken down and replaced by new bone. The bone is broken down by specialist cells called osteoclasts, and new bone is formed by another type of cells called osteoblasts. About 10% of our bone mass is remodeled in this way every single year. The first evidence that alcohol is not particularly friendly on our bones came in the mid-1960s. That's when researchers studying cadavers noticed that those of deceased alcoholics had markedly reduced bone mass. In the decades that followed, other researchers replicated and elaborated on these findings. They found that certain bones, like those of the vertebral column and hip, were especially susceptible to this reduction in mass. So, it became apparent that alcohol does something to the bones that interferes with their normal functioning. Remember the osteoblast that we just mentioned? Well, these are the cells responsible for forming new bones during remodeling. Well, it turns out that alcohol directly inhibits the formation of these cells, disrupts their growth, and also interferes with their DNA synthesis. So with less osteoblasts in action, the result is insufficient formation of new bone to replace what is lost during remodeling, leading to decreased lost bone mass. Apart from this direct effect on the osteoblasts, scientists suspect that ethanol impacts bone health through a number of indirect mechanisms. For example, poor nutrition and nutrient absorption, which is very common in heavy drinkers, will also negatively affect bone metabolism. Similarly for oxidative stress and liver disease, which are all also common in heavy drinkers. And then of course, there's vitamin D. So let's look at vitamin D deficiency. So vitamin D is a critically important molecule for human health. Receptors for this vitamin are widely distributed throughout the human body. And in recent years, scientists have realized that chronic deficiency probably contributes to a stunning array of human disease. This includes increased risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, autoimmune conditions, as well as mood disorders like depression. Vitamin D is also necessary for healthy bones. Calcium is a major component of bones, and without vitamin D, the bones cannot sufficiently absorb the calcium. And along with various other nutritional deficiencies, heavy drinkers also tend to be severely deficient in vitamin D. This is typically so low that it falls well below the minimum recommended levels. Scientists aren't exactly sure why this is so, but they suspect that it's a combination of various factors, including liver dysfunction, poor diet, and inadequate exposure to sunlight. Now, whatever the reason, they know that this chronic vitamin D deficiency impacts bone health, and they have found a very straightforward way to quantify this effect. We will come to this shortly, but it's very interesting. But first, I want us to have another quick look at another aspect of bone health. Earlier on, we looked at diminished bone mass in heavy drinkers. Now, this in and of itself is an important indication of bone health. But another important parameter is the so-called bone mineral density, or BMD. This is a measure of the strength and density of your bones, and probably the single most important marker of your overall bone health. Low BMD is the hallmark of a common condition called osteoporosis. This is literally the Greek term meaning porous bones. Osteoporosis becomes more common with age in both sexes, and especially in women after the menopause. But across the board, osteoporosis rates have been rising, making this condition one of the top health concerns in industrialized societies. About 10% of people over the age of 50 nowadays suffer from it. Now, researchers have established that heavy chronic drinking is one of the contributing factors to these increased osteoporosis rates. According to a recent meta-analysis, the risk is closely linked to increased alcohol consumption. Those who drink half to one drink a day have a 38% higher chance of developing osteoporosis compared to non-drinkers. For those who consume more than 2 drinks a day, the risk rises by 63%. While osteoporosis has no visible symptoms per se, it increases the risk of a very unpleasant secondary effect: bone fractures. A few years after the 1965 discovery that heavy drinking leads to bone loss, another researcher working in a Seattle hospital noted that heavy drinkers were dramatically predisposed to fractures. Multiple fractures that had typically happened at different times and were in different stages of the healing process. Now, more specifically, he noted that 62% of patients in his hospital who had 3 fractures or more were heavy drinkers. He actually called this battered alcoholic syndrome and proposed that a physician who spots these fractures should immediately suspect drinking problems. Now, the fractures are actually most commonly located on the ribs. Many of these will go unnoticed by the patient, only to be detected when they happen to have an x-ray, usually for one of the fractures that they actually do notice. So, depending on the study, the proportion of heavy drinkers with rib fractures is as high as 50%. These people are also more prone to classical kinds of fractures, for example in the hip. And hip fractures can be particularly devastating. A major life-altering event involving hospitalization, surgery, or even hip replacement. So all these heavy fractures are a combination of the bone damage accumulated over the years of heavy drinking, as well as the falls that other heavy drinkers are prone to, as well as the falls and other accidents that heavy drinkers are prone to. So, remember the vitamin D deficiency that we mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out that those drinkers with severe vitamin D deficiency are at an especially high risk of fractures. Those with unhealthy eating habits and poor overall nutrition are more prone. Now, if you're still drinking and the video so far has left you a bit anxious or nervous, I would say that that's not so bad. While it's never our intention to actually scare you and use scare tactics, the first step to change is self-awareness. And topics like booze on your bones for one reason or another are almost completely absent from public discourse. So understandably, a lot of the stuff that we've just covered, it might come as a bit of a surprise. But now I want you to know this. However much alcohol has damaged your bones, a large part of the damage can be reversed when you free yourself from the alcohol trap. And I mean, it's astonishingly fast. Remember the impaired bone formation of a new bone that we saw earlier? Well, according to one study, only 3 weeks of abstinence were enough to bring markers of bone formation on par with the control group of non-drinkers. So aside from the obvious thing of stopping drinking, other steps that you can take to support your bones recovery include: A, check your vitamin D levels and supplement as required. B, consume a well-balanced diet rich in calcium. C, exercise to the extent that you can. And D, if you are smoking, quit yesterday. And guys, if you click the video on the screen now, you can learn why a drinking problem exists with a new system to gain control.